Thank you so much. I hope we're all excited to hear some lovely presentations on the African coastal marine and island tourism. I know I definitely am. Are Serena and Charmaine ready to start their presentations?
Hi, Nina. Yes, I'm here. Can I share my screen?
Yes, please do.
Perfect. Okay, let me know if you can see my screen.
Yes, I can see your screen. Thank you very much.
Perfect. So hello, everyone. My name is Charmaine, and I'm a PhD candidate at Northwest University under TREES, a unit working on tourism and recreation research in South Africa. Today, I'm here to present the findings of a study that focuses on marine wildlife voluntourism. Marine ecosystems are essential for supporting biodiversity and human societies. Human activities affect these ecosystems, resulting in the potential extinction of species and habitat degradation. Conservation interventions are used to meet sustainable development goals and to reduce the negative human impacts. These efforts have opened doors for potentially sustainable tourism activities in natural environments, such as marine wildlife tourism. Based on the conservation-related education and information received during a marine wildlife tourism activity, marine wildlife tourists tend to support the protection of marine areas and marine life. More people are also participating in citizen science and voluntourism activities revolving around the marine environment. Marine wildlife voluntourism was born as a way to promote tourism that would revolve mainly around participating in marine conservation and science, while also enjoying a coastal destination and its attractions. Marine wildlife voluntourism activities can have important positive effects on conservation, the voluntourists, the local environment, communities and economies, and also science, decision-making, and policy. Why research marine voluntourism in Southern Africa? Southern Africa has vast coastlines and hosts a biodiversity of marine wildlife species, some of which are threatened. As we can see from the maps, Southern Africa hosts marine wildlife voluntourism programs, indicating that there is a market. However, marine wildlife voluntourism remains a relatively understudied subject, requiring thorough investigation, not only to tap its potential, but also to address its main challenges and problems, and ultimately to promote its sustainable growth. Therefore, this study aimed to identify the qualities of marine wildlife voluntourism in Southern Africa by characterizing organizations offering marine wildlife voluntourism programs and their market structure or segmentation. Data were collected in Southern Africa at 3 marine wildlife voluntourism organizations, located one in South Africa, one in Mozambique, and one in Madagascar. A mixed method approach was followed using convenient sampling. From June 2019 to June 2020, 142 segmentation questionnaires were collected from the voluntourists, and I conducted interviews with 30 voluntourists and 24 staff members, including managerial staff. The data were collected both face-to-face and through online methods, such as Skype or an online version of the questionnaire survey. The quantitative data were analyzed using a variety of statistical analysis, such as factor analysis, and the qualitative data were analyzed using thematic analysis. The table displays the conceptualized business model canvas for the organizations at the 3 case studies, obtained through interviews with the staff. The business models of the organizations had certain similarities and differences. Organizations in South Africa and Mozambique were similar in many respects, whereas Madagascar was a standalone case study. The South African and Mozambique organizations were similar mainly due to their tourism and research focus. They obtained additional support from other non-governmental organizations that could assist with additional key activities and research projects, and also reach out to more potential voluntourists. They included more touristic activities, potentially attracting a larger market. The value proposition of these case studies was not only animal and environmental focused, but also community focused. They strive to assist, improve, and sustain the local community surrounding them. The key resources also included the local destination, community, staff, and equipment. They also adopted more marketing strategies. They had different and more operation-focused cost structure, with their revenue stream being very dependent on the tourists themselves and then on other external sources. The Madagascar organization did not obtain additional support from other non-governmental organizations. It was very much focused on the science and skills development of the participants, and the courses offered were seen as an additional marketing strategy. Due to its nature, it might not be able to focus on and impact the local community, and might not have staff, equipment, and a destination to consider as key resources. It rather considered the marine animal species data bank as a key resource. It had different expenses that focus on the education and training factors of the voluntourists. It also relied mainly on the revenue from the expeditions and donations for funding. These differences may have implications in the experiences of the voluntourists and make it possible to highlight potential areas of improvement to guarantee positive impacts on the tourists, the organizations, the local communities, and the research and conservation efforts revolving around marine wildlife. The majority of the voluntourists in the case studies were female, single, and 29 years old on average, with the South African case study having the youngest and the Mozambique case study having the oldest voluntourists. The voluntourists originated mainly from Europe or North America. Most had a university degree in environmental or biological sciences and were still studying, possibly at postgraduate level. They preferred nature, wildlife, and water-based tourism. They were introduced to voluntourism through their friends and school. About half of them had previous marine wildlife voluntourism experience and had an average trip duration of 34 days. The Madagascar study had the longest trip duration, followed by South Africa and Mozambique, which had the shortest. This slide shows the results of factor analysis performed on many variables measured to segment the voluntourists. Motivations to participate in marine wildlife voluntourism included ecocentric, which was the largest factor, followed by personal development, personal well-being, and social values. Preferences in marine wildlife voluntourism also included ecocentric ones, followed by activities. The voluntourists had high expectations for overall program quality, which was the largest factor, followed by detailed information and a quality destination. The tourists were highly satisfied with their experience at the destination. Satisfaction factors included destination and interaction, which was the largest factor, followed by information and education and overall program quality. The volunteers also believed that the organization acted according to ethical standards concerning people and wildlife. Finally, they shared positive post-experience attitudes towards the environment, environmental education, compliance and advocacy, volunteering, citizen science, scientific career choices, and paying for conservation. The results of this study show that marine wildlife voluntourism can be an empowering form of tourism, attracting ecocentric people who want to help marine conservation and science and are willing to spend long periods doing it. It has the potential to support positive post-trip environmental attitudes, as well as scientific research and community engagement. So we could argue that marine wildlife voluntourism is one of the reasons to fall back in love with African tourism due to its qualities. There's still room for marine wildlife voluntourism in Southern Africa to improve and grow to be a sustainable alternative form of tourism. To understand the directions to take, especially after the COVID-19 pandemic, more research is required. For example, the resilience of this sector post-COVID-19 should be explored. How the market may need to change following the pandemic, as well as a deeper understanding of the market for marine wildlife voluntourism and other types of voluntourism. I would like to thank the participants in the study and the 3 organizations that allowed me to collect data. I would also like to thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to take any questions, comments, or suggestions that you may have at the end of the session. Thank you once again.
Thank you so much, Charmaine, for such a fascinating presentation. If anybody has any questions, please just raise your hand or put it in the chat box.
I'm sharing.
Okay, cool. So it seems we don't have any questions. If you do have any, please just post them in the chat box to Charmaine. Could I also ask all the presenters to share their emails if anybody does have any other questions they'd like to ask? Our next presenter is Richard. He will be presenting on community-based tourism in marine protected areas in Africa. Richard, if you're ready, the floor is all yours.
Thank you, Nina. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening to everyone who's joined this session. I'm just going to share my screen quickly. Sorry, I'm busy experiencing some technical challenges because I've lost internet in my house due to an electrical surge over the weekend. Just give me 2 seconds. Can everyone see the presentation?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. I won't waste too much time. Sorry about that technical glitch. So I'm probably preaching to the converted here, but in introduction, tourism is known and considered by many to be one of the most prolific economic development tools in Africa. It's been considered this by many academics and many professional organizations such as the UNWTO. In fact, most of tourism's true assets are found predominantly in rural areas or areas that are considered to be off the beaten track. These areas are often inhabited by local communities, some of which know about tourism, some of which don't. And these cases are quite prevalent in areas known as protected areas or areas with natural significance and heritage. Therefore, the age-old concept of community-based tourism in protected areas has been quite a common topic in academic literature for several decades. But the general trend of literature has often shifted or focused on protected areas that are land-based, such as your national parks, transfrontier conservation areas, game reserves. So this has left a gap in terms of community-based tourism in marine protected areas. This paper has provided a brief or broad overview on community-based tourism practices and initiatives in some of Africa's most established marine protected areas. The main focused area of this study for the marine protected areas is the Western Indian Ocean region, which comprises of 10 countries being members. I won't go through each one just for the sake of time, but basically you're looking at the whole east coast of Africa, including most of the island nations off the east coast of Africa as well. The methodology that was used is a methodology I use in pretty much all of my research, which is the upside down triangle. So it's basically focuses on the use of secondary data in the form of desktop research, and involves a selective review of available secondary research on the concept of marine protected areas, community-based tourism, in an international best practice context. And it will then follow, as you can see in the diagram, a pattern where the international best practice will be looked at, then zooming down into a regional context and zooming down into a national context. When I talk about international, you're looking at other areas, global areas of the world that have marine protected areas with community-based tourism initiatives. Your regional aspects is other more confined areas, and your national aspects are looking at each aspect of the individual countries under the study of the Western Indian Ocean region. So the paper is diving into a brief, broad overview of different marine protected areas and how they've implemented community-based tourism initiatives. The paper is still a working paper, and the categories for comparison are still being refined. But here's just a few examples of the main factors that are being looked at. So obviously, a single marine protected area within a member state has been identified. So for example, South Africa, I've looked at the Isimangaliso Marine Protected Area, which is also a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Looked at the year that it was proclaimed or established. Looked at factors relating to its status or category. So does it have any IUCN or other global authorities type of recognition? And then what type of marine protected area it is in terms of whether it's coastal or offshore, only offshore, only coastal, etc. Then the two main other areas or categories that are being looked at are its governance and management. So is it owned or governed by the government of the country? Is it 100% owned or governed by the local community? Is it owned or governed by a private sector organization that probably pocket all the money and give nothing back to the community? So this is one of the most important categories that's being looked at. And then also looking at threats or SWOT analysis, but mainly focusing on threats and opportunities. So looking at each marine protected area and how what threats there are in terms of its conservation status. Is tourism a threat? Is tourism an opportunity? And diving deeper into the whole concept of the community-based tourism initiatives. So for the sake of time, I'm not going to go through every single bit of text in here, but for this paper, there was comparisons drawn between 5 different countries and 5 different marine protected areas, obviously one in each country. So the first example, South Africa, second being Mozambique, third being the Reunion Island, which is a French territory, fourth being the Republic of Mauritius, and fifth being the Comores. Once again, for the sake of time, I have rushed through because I know this is the graveyard shift, end of the day. So in conclusion, I just want to say that the paper, the whole purpose of the paper was to touch on the whole concept of the blue economy. Marine and coastal tourism is a popular area of study in many academic disciplines, but also governments and international organizations such as UNESCO have placed marine and coastal areas as a top priority for development, conservation, etc. So the topic of this paper basically focuses on the forefront of many global development plans and strategies, and it's directly related to the UN Sustainable Development Goal number 14, which looks at life below water. It's also indirectly related to a number of the other UN's Sustainable Development Goals, and the overarching concept is imperative need for sustainable development that complements both the natural environment and the needs and lifestyles of humans. Thank you very much for listening. I will put my contact details in the chat for any further questions, but I'll just leave my screen for a couple more seconds with my details over there as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Richard. That was super interesting. Does anybody have any questions that they'd like to ask? Please just raise your hand or post them in the chat box. Okay, no, if you do have any, just take his details down. You can email him or you can post them in the chat box over time. Our next presenter is Helen, and she'll be presenting on lighting the Cape of Storms, lighthouse tourism along South Africa's Atlantic coastline. Helen, are you ready to present?
I am. Can everybody see my screen?
Yes, we can. If you could just put it in a slideshow.
Sure.
Thank you.
Just checking that everyone could see the screen first.
Yes, that's perfect. Thank you so much.
Right. Right. I'm Helen Nell. I am affiliated to the Department of Historical and Heritage Studies at the University of Pretoria as well. A long way from where I studied, I'm looking at the lighthouses of South Africa, and in particular, the lighthouses along the Cape of Storms. And so just a little introduction, pharological tourism, which is the study of lighthouses, pharology being the study of tourism from Pharos, which was the first lighthouse, and it also means fire. So there we go, literally a fire tower. It's already a very successful international phenomenon in terms of tourism, and is involved in a lot of the tourism areas in countries across the world, including England and Scotland, who have lighthouse trails that you can follow. Croatia, where again you can stay in the lighthouses. India, which has had a huge push recently in terms of developing lighthouse tourism. And then Canada, which is actually the only country worldwide that has legislation related to who owns and looks after their lighthouses. And these have really kind of come about because the navigational techniques used by shipping companies, et cetera, have grown relatively hugely, if I can put it that way. So the lighthouses are less necessary in terms of navigation than they once were, because sonar and those kind of things have come into play. And so they have become obsolete, and with the lighthouses becoming more obsolete, we as communities have looked at a way of saving them. This is a huge developmental opportunity in South Africa, and particularly in marine and coastal tourism, but it also links to many heritage, community, and route development opportunities. And we'll look at this in more detail as we go through. It is important to note that the loss of lighthouse keepers, there are only about 4 to 5 lighthouse keepers left in South Africa, means that lots of the lighthouse history and the heritage of the lighthouse in itself is very much under stress and largely endangered. So this is a tourism opportunity that needs to be grabbed sooner rather than later in order to make the most of those knowledge bases. Something that draws people to lighthouses is obviously the aesthetic aspect of the lighthouses. They've been romanticized and glorified through literature throughout history, from Homer through to How I Met Your Mother in recent years. With the current focus that's been done in South Africa on marine and coastal tourism, as I say, we are really ripe for the development of lighthouse tourism, especially following COVID-19. And this is largely just because lighthouses obviously can't take huge numbers of people at one time, and so it's much easier to control access. In terms of the lighthouses of the Cape of Storms and why I chose this particular region, the Cape of Storms has always been a significant coastline. It's been written about from the ancient Greeks as the resting place of the Titan associated with oceans, Oceanus, to folklore such as the Flying Dutchman, and then through navigational literature throughout history. It needs to be highlighted that of the 45 to 50 South African lighthouses, 45 or so of which are functional, over half are on the Atlantic coastline of South Africa. And so because of that, this is the section that I've chosen to look at. Many of these are more modern lattice lighthouses, so they don't actually have the lighthouse shape. They are simply towers with a lantern on the top. And so those are not going to be included in this presentation, but really those that I believe have space for tourism development, and some of my favorites as well, are included in this presentation. The first we're looking at is the Cape Agulhas Lighthouse. This lighthouse is perhaps one of South Africa's most well-known and also most accessible lighthouses. The Cape of Agulhas was named by Bartholomew Diaz, in 1488 in a reference to the way that the compass needle used to spin when rounding this cape. And that's largely because it's the actual tip of South Africa. It's also important as a tourism site because it is also the meeting point of the Atlantic and Indian Oceans. It became apparent quite quickly that a lighthouse was vital along this jagged stretch of coast because lots of vessels used to wreck in this area due to hidden rocks and reefs. Also because of the wind and fog that rolls over this area as well. So this lighthouse was commissioned in 1849, and it was built with 3-meter thick walls that were made of limestone that was found locally in the area. The limestone is also a contributing factor to the style of this lighthouse, which is the Egyptian revival style, which was a popular trend in France at the time of the lighthouse installation. But it's also nicely reflective of the Pharos lighthouse on the opposite side of the continent in Egypt. So a nice little link there. There were also Egyptian motifs that were carved into this lighthouse as well. It was declared a national monument in 1973 after quite a long time of disrepair, and it was repaired and reopened to the public in 1999 when the Agulhas National Park was opened, which is where this lighthouse is now situated. It's quite a popular tourism area, as I stated. It's only a 4-hour drive outside of Cape Town and is the meeting point of the Indian and Atlantic Oceans. The lighthouse itself is only 27 meters tall, so not a very tall lighthouse in the scope of things, and has a series of wooden stairs leading up to the lantern house. It can be quite claustrophobic, but you can climb this lighthouse to this day. There is potential to develop this lighthouse with a curio shop or a restaurant, something along those lines. The next one along the coast is the Danger Point Lighthouse. And this one is hugely associated with the Birkenhead wreck, which is the wreck where the Birkenhead drill was invented, which is the idea of women and children exiting the wreck first. And this meant that they then swam towards the area where the lighthouse is in Khansbai, but although being less than 2 kilometers from the shore, many of them, less than 210, survived the sinking of the vessel for multiple reasons, but mostly because it was so dark that they physically did not know which way land was. And so the 18-meter tall masonry tower was built, and it was supposed to be cast iron, but due to a lack of iron in the time it was built, it was then made masonry. And this was opened for the first time on New Year's Day in 1895. Centenary celebrations were held in 1995, and there is a small museum inside this lighthouse as well. It's quite isolated from local communities, but this area, the lighthouse and the outer buildings at the site have been turned into conference centers and into accommodation that you can stay at as well. It is manned, however, the lighthouse keeper is more of a guide to the sites now than he is a lighthouse keeper, much like the other lighthouse keepers along the coastline. Following this is the Roman Rock Lighthouse. This one is unique as it is the only rock-based lighthouse in the Southern Hemisphere. So it is based off the shore in Simonstown. It is a cast iron lighthouse, but it has a walkway around it as well, largely because when it was first built, it needed to be manned. And so people lived in the lighthouse and they needed somewhere to be able to get their daily exercise. It's not accessible to the public, but it has become a popular turn point for kayaks and sea bikes, where you literally pedal along the ocean, as well as being accessible or seen from the penguin beaches, such as boulders and those surrounding it. So really in a highlighted tourism spot as well. Following that, we have 2 of the most popular lighthouses, and if people have come to the South African lighthouses, this is the one they normally have seen. The Cape Point lighthouses, the old one and the new one that we will be getting to shortly, are both situated in the Cape Point Nature Reserve. And these also have things like the DS beacon and various beaches and game as well. So it's within a nature conservation space. The old Cape Point Lighthouse that you see in this photograph is at the top of the Vasco da Gama Peak. And the walk can take anywhere from 10 to 25 minutes, depending on your fitness level. But there is a funicular that gets you up as well. The funniest thing
sorry
for
to
me
interrupt, Helen.
Sure.
You do need to start coming to an end as you're 10
Sure,
minutes
that's
out.
fine.
Thank you.
Perfect. All right. So just want to run through, I'm not going to get through them all, but there are various lighthouses along this coastline that are very different in their styles and very different in their coastlines, this being the oldest one, and it's due for its double centenary in 2 years' time. Just adding to this, obviously there's development happening. The Lighthouses of South Africa Facebook page has been gaining a lot of traction. And they are developing a lighthouse passport where you can stamp your passport for each lighthouse you've visited. And so, as I was saying, this is a huge space that we can step into for tourism. And the more we can encourage people to visit our lighthouses, the better, and link them to diving and to shipwrecks as well. I just want to leave you with this quote from Virginia Woolf that said, lighthouses are endlessly suggestive signifiers of both human isolation and our ultimate connectedness to each other. And I think that sums it up entirely. Yeah, if there are any questions, I will put my email address into the chat box as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much for such a lovely presentation. Lighthouses are always fascinating. I see we do have one question from Chaya. She says your topic is exceptionally interesting, but she'd like to know what the outcome of your research was.
Yeah, so it's pretty straightforward. The lighthouses here are not recognized as tourism structures, but rather as navigational structures. And so it was a study into, this is only a section of what my master's entailed, and ultimately putting us on the global scene in terms of lighthouse tourism and developing lighthouse tourism. Obviously, analyzing the lighthouses, I didn't quite get to my point at the end, but route development and developing a tourism route that highlights both the natural areas and then the potential for tourism at each lighthouse.
All right, thank you. I hope that answers your question. If anybody has any other questions, please just put it in the chat box. Helen said she'll put her email there, and you can just email her and get any further answers you'd like to have. Our final presenter today is Chaya. She will be discussing shifting power structures in the hospitality industry, case study of Mauritius. And I see you are ready to go. Thank you.
Hi everyone. I know that you're all very tired, and after this long but very enriching presentations of all our dear colleagues, so I'll ask you to bear with me on this last presentation so that I can just explain to you what is happening in the tourism, in the hospitality industry in Mauritius, and why I'm talking about shifting power structures. So basically what do we see is that tourism development in African countries as well as in small island developing states have been mostly described as being enclavic. So what do we understand by enclaves is that they are self-contained facilities that actually discourage tourists from spending outside their perimeters. And what do we see is that literature has mostly studied enclaves from the dependency theory. In tourism, the work of Britain has been very enlightening about this theory, whereby he posits that actually it is the metropolitan enterprises or and firms coming from developed countries, from central countries, etc., from core centers actually that largely dictate the forms and characteristics of tourism experience, and therefore that subsequently influence the products and services that are likely to be owned and the products and services of tourism that are offered in peripheral destinations. So to make it to be a bit simpler, it is actually by having a predominance of foreign ownership of tourism firms in peripheral destinations such as African countries or small island destinations, what happens is that they influence the form of tourism development in these peripheral islands or in these peripheral countries. So what happens is that the dependency theory has been mostly used to look at a binary relationship between central developed countries and underdeveloped or peripheral countries that maybe lack resources or lack financial resources to actually develop their own tourism industry. However, this theory has been later discussed and criticized by proponents of the agency theory. They propose that actually people, civilians, businesses actually can use their own free will and actions in order to invest and choose their own type of tourism development in their local destinations, in their countries, in peripheral islands, for example. However, both of these theories have been criticized, and the focus of this research has been mostly the usage of the structuration theory, which at macro level looks at the structure of tourism development, and at micro level combines and looks at what are the actions and agencies and entrepreneurial skills that local groups are using, local hotel groups are using to actually change these types of predominant structures. So what are my research questions? What have been my research questions? It has been to try to understand what is the current ownership structure of hotels in an island destination such as Mauritius. Has this type of ownership structure evolved throughout time since Mauritius is actually a mature destination of about 50 years now? And also my third question was to understand how locally owned or Mauritian-owned hotel groups are actually behaving and how they are influencing tourism development structures in Mauritius, in the Indian Ocean region, as well as in the broader in other countries. So I have used determinants such as ownership structure. We have looked at competencies and hotel brands in order to look at this term structure of hotels. And the types of data I've been using are mostly desk research, as well as interviews with CEOs of the 5 major hotel groups in Mauritius. So for those who don't know where Mauritius is found, we are a very small island found in the southeast, in southwest Indian Ocean, along approximately 900 kilometers away from Madagascar. And what is interesting about Mauritius as a tourism destination is that with its 330 kilometers of coastline, it is mostly a destination for the beach, whereby the main activities are the free essence and relaxation. So rather than talking about a tourism industry in Mauritius, we mostly talk about a hotel industry in Mauritius, and mostly the hotels themselves, they are structured as resorts. And there are approximately 112 certified hotels in Mauritius, representing about 13,000 hotel rooms. So if we look at structure, basic structure in terms of categories, in terms of star categories, we find that there is a predominance of 4-star and 5-star categories, and afterwards of 3-star hotels and 2-star. Otherwise, we don't have 1-star rated hotels, etc. Also, what do we find? And this is quite important, is that we have approximately 21 hotels of the 112 hotels that are privately owned or self-managed, privately or family-owned hotels that are managed locally. We have about 54 hotels that are mostly regrouped under hotel companies and that are public listed on the Stock Exchange of Mauritius, and also that are managed locally by local experts. At the same time, we have 2 hotels, okay, that are locally owned and operated by a local franchise as well. And what is maybe also important is that we have about 28 properties that are foreign owned, mostly by French and Indian capital, and that are operated by foreign franchises. So what can we deduce from this type of structure is that we found that there is a predominance of over 60% rather, I would say of over 75% of hotels that are locally owned in terms of investment capital, that are managed by local competencies, and that bear local brands rather than foreign brands. Okay, so has this been the case previously since we started during the years 1970s? Obviously not. So what has happened is that during the years 1970s and 1980s, there have been mostly foreign hotel groups that have been investing in Mauritius, such as the Club Med, which is a very well-known French brand because, of course, of historical ties. There has been a South African brand, the Sun International, that invested in Mauritius and that developed the tourism industry, that developed hotels in Mauritius, especially with their specific morphology. So what has happened is that during the years 1990s, we see a real tendency, a real inverted tendency, whereby increasingly more and more hotels that were constructed were by local capital rather than foreign capital, and that have been managed both by local and foreign expertise and brands. The years 2000 have been different as well, whereby gradually foreign expertise have been limited, have been controlled by the government to encourage and to empower local management teams to take over. And during the years 2010, we have seen that there has been significant changes in the hotel sector, in the hotel structure, whereby we see that there are fewer hotels that are being constructed, but even the few hotels that are being constructed, they are from local investment capital, they are locally managed, and they are under local brands. So what does this say? It says that yes, the tourism industry in Mauritius, the hotel industry at least in Mauritius, is changing. The powers are changing. This is a very early version. This is the first hotel that was constructed. And you can see that they resembled mostly lodges rather than what we see now. This is the type of hotel that we are having. That is the beach resorts. They are now resorts. They are really stretched out over the beach side, okay, open on the beach and closed off along the coastal road by thick walls. And what do we say is that they are really, they really sprawl along the beach, the coastline. And this is the type of structure that even if these forms of hotel resorts were developed by foreign investors such as Club Med, etc., during the years 1970s and 80s, these types of resort morphologies are being reproduced, have been reproduced by local hotel brands or local hotel chains. Furthermore, what do we see is that as from the years 2000, because there has been a lot of state control over new hotel constructions in Mauritius, what do we see is that hotel groups needing to survive and needing to continue expansion, they have started to invest and manage hotels in other islands in the Indian Ocean, such as the Seychelles and Maldives, and even Réunion to a certain extent. There is one property that is owned by one hotel group in the Réunion Island. But also, what do we see? What has been the tendency during the years 2010 is that now more and more these hotel groups are going beyond the Indian Ocean region. Some of them are going in China. One has gone into Morocco, which are newly industrialized countries. And what do we see is that one group is actually managing, not investing capital, but rather managing under its brand hotels in China that are owned by Chinese people. And the same can be, and in Morocco, it's a bit different, where the property is owned by the Mauritian group as well as managed by that group. So as well, what do we see is that during the years 2015, now Mauritian hotel groups are actually having franchise contracts in developed countries. There are 2 properties that are now being managed by a Mauritian hotel group under a franchise contract. So that's quite interesting, because what we have seen in the earlier version is that investment capital, expertise, as well as brand names or franchises were coming from developed countries into the peripheral islands. Now we see that there is a tendency of there is an inverted tendency. So what can we see is that through the agency of these hotels, we can see 3 types of structures that are emerging. For example, we find that now the hospitality industry in Mauritius is mostly Mauritian owned, managed, and Mauritian brands. Okay. At the same time, what do we see is that these hotel brands, they are themselves reproducing similar dependency structures in neighboring islands, as well as what do we see is that through their brand penetration in developed countries, they are now inverting these traditional dependency relationships and thus paving the way towards new power structures in global trade, in global tourism. So what is the purpose of this study and what is the significance of this study? So basically, this study aims to contribute to literature on capital competencies and brand movements in international hospitality industry, and thus in showing how power structures are shifting and how hotel groups from peripheral islands can actually change tourism development in developed countries, which is quite something new. So therefore, this study also shows the redundancy of dependency theories, at least in its simplified binary form that has been prevailing so far. And practically, what can we see is that the strategies of these hotel groups in Mauritius can be used as a case study for other hotel groups to produce from other hotel groups to produce in the future. So thank you for your attention. I have tried to really go through this in a very short and quick manner, but I remain available for any further questions.
Thank you so much, Chaya. That was really interesting. Does anybody have any questions? If you have any, please just put it in the chat box or email her. I'd like to thank everybody. We have finished a little bit earlier, but I'd like to thank everybody in joining us for these presentations. They were really lovely and very interesting. It's been very entertaining from my side, and I'm pretty sure everybody else has really enjoyed it. Are there any house comments that need to be made?
Thank you everybody. Really interesting papers again, so thanks very much. Yes, if everyone can go back to the main room, that's where the final presentation will be, and that's where we will also close today's conference. So you can leave this breakout room and head back to the main room. I think that the other session is also about finished, so we should all be just about finishing at the same time. So thank you everybody, and we look forward to seeing you for just this last presentation.